Sometimes I can feel like an outsider. It is easier to make friends in the UK compared to Portugal because when I was in Portugal a few years ago in a nightclub, I tried to approach this woman and she gave me this look like very closed-minded, very don't touch me or don't talk to me, and that made me feel...
This is Tiago. He's been living in the UK for 15 years after growing up in Lisbon. In this video, he shares the biggest cultural shocks, how his view of Portugal has changed, and whether he'd ever move back or if it's too late. If you've ever thought of starting over in Portugal, especially if you're coming from the UK, then Tiago's honest answers might help you make a better decision. So, regardless of where you're coming from, stick around and let's find out together.
Hello, my name is Tiago and I'm originally from Lisbon, Portugal. I've been living in the UK for the past 15 years. Today, I will be sharing my experience as a long-term expat in the UK.
What was the biggest cultural shock when you first moved to the UK? And does it still affect you today?
Yes, the biggest cultural shock for me was the language. And as an example, I will be talking about, for example, in Portugal, wherever you go, if you're from Lisbon and you go to Porto, you can still understand each other, even though the accent is a bit different. Whereas in the UK, for example, I'm from Nottingham, and one time I went to Newcastle, and the way they speak, the accent is completely different, and it feels to me like that it's an entire different language, because I probably can understand them like 10% of what they say, and it still affects me today. So I would say that's the biggest cultural shock.
How has your perception of Portugal changed after living in the UK for so long?
This is an interesting question. I can say, for example, food-wise, the way I see and I feel Portuguese food. I can give examples, for example, of cucumber, vegetables, or even sweet potato in the UK. Doesn't really have a taste when comparing back in Portugal. It's so much better and more tasty as well. Also, I would say I see myself staying more at home in the UK, mostly because of the weather and also because compared to Portugal, there isn't many fun things to do outside. It changed my perception a lot. But at the end of the day, it is what it is.
What's something you thought you'd never get used to in the UK, but now feels normal?
Out of the top of my head, I have to choose the weather. When I first got here, the weather used to be worse than it is now. Used to snow a lot, especially in wintertime. Summertime, you used to have good weather, even though if it's for 1 week or 2 weeks of sun and warmth. But I thought I would never get used to the cold, especially in wintertime. It can be -5, -10. Back in the days, I even experienced -15. So that's something I thought I would never get used to. But I came to the realization and I made my peace with it because that's what we have. And if you don't make your peace with how the weather is in this country, then you can never be truly at peace. So that's it for me. Yeah.
What's a daily habit you've picked up in the UK that you never had in Portugal?
I actually have quite a few. The first one is apologizing more when we are walking outside, for example, and we bump into someone. Automatically the I'm sorry or just sorry already comes to my mind. And this is something I never or very rarely I would do it in Portugal. The second thing probably would be talking about the weather a lot of times or complaining about the weather a lot of times. So yeah, I would say these are two things that I picked up when I moved over here.
How does the work-life balance in the UK compare to what you remember from Portugal?
Well, from what I remember from Portugal, I used to go to work, heavy traffic or very busy in transport, train, bus, you name it. So what I remember is going to work, finish work, and come back home. In the UK, talking more about Nottingham, as that's where I live for most of my years in here, it's more chilled, it's more relaxed, because Nottingham, compared to Lisbon, for example, is a small city, and sometimes after work I have time to go to a pub or go play snooker, for example, with my friends and co-workers, or go to the cinemas. So I would say the work-life balance over here is better, in my experience, than Portugal.
If you had to describe the biggest mindset difference between Portuguese and British people, what would it be?
I would say the biggest mindset is politeness. From my experience, as I already said in a previous question, British people in general can be very polite. You're walking outside, if you bump into someone, they will apologize straight away. Or if you give your way through for another person to pass before you, they will say thank you. Obviously, we'll say welcome after it. So I would say that's the biggest mindset, because when I used to live in Portugal, and still when I go to Portugal nowadays, I don't see that happening at all. So yeah, that's the biggest mindset for sure.
How easy is it to make friends in the UK compared to Portugal?
I would say, in my experience, that it is easier to make friends in the UK compared to Portugal, because British people can be very open-minded, and especially in night outs or parties, from my experience, they are much more approachable than in Portugal. Obviously, this might differ from person to person, but I would say that it is easier to make friends in the UK.
Do you feel like the Portuguese community in the UK is strong? Or do people eventually lose their connection to Portugal?
From my experience, never. The Portuguese community in the UK is very strong. I know that because when I first came here in 15 years ago, I already had 2 or 3 Portuguese friends living in here. And since then, I've been introduced to the Portuguese community, other Portuguese people that lived in here, and it just grew. It just grew, and I can speak from experience. And even today, we still maintain contact. We speak about every week. We do things together. We travel together. So I can strongly say that the Portuguese community in the UK is very strong.
What's the biggest difference between socializing in Portugal versus the UK? Friendships, night out culture, small talk, etc.
All right, this is a good question. As I already said, in the UK, most people are more open-minded, more approachable. So from my experience, the being more open-minded is the key between both countries. And I can give an example. When I was in Portugal a few years ago, in a nightclub, I tried to approach this woman, and she gave me this look like very closed-minded, very don't touch me or don't talk to me, and that made me feel some type of way. So comparing to the UK, you don't really see this type of behavior. If you do approach man or woman in a nice way, they will welcome you and they will talk to you as normal. They don't hold nothing against you. Obviously, this is in general, not... You obviously have some people that act like that, but I would say that's the biggest difference for sure.
After so many years in the UK, do you feel more Portuguese or more British?
It's a good question. I feel more Portuguese in a lot of subjects, but for example, in a subject like language, I do feel more British, because since I live here, my brain has adapted, and it thinks like British first and Portuguese after. So sometimes I do forget some Portuguese words, and I need to translate in my mind from British to Portuguese, or I need to ask sometimes to my Portuguese friends or family, or how do you say this in Portuguese? So I still consider myself more Portuguese in a lot of aspects. I still prefer the food. I still prefer the weather. I still prefer perhaps the environments over there. So yeah, I would consider 70% Portuguese, 30% British.
Do you ever feel like an outsider when you visit Portugal now? Why or why not?
Yes, sometimes I can feel like an outsider. And why is that? As I've been living in the UK for so long now, when I do go back, sometimes to visit family or just for vacation, things can change a lot. And sometimes when it's to organize activities or plans to see friends or family, it's difficult for me to find out things to do. Whereas when I used to live there, most of the times I used to know, okay, we're going to do this, we're going to do that, and then we're going to do this. So now it's more difficult for me to find things to do. Therefore, I need to go online and just Google places. So yeah, I would say most of the times I feel like an outsider, yes.
If you could mix the best aspects of both cultures into one ideal country, what would it look like?
This feels like a no-brainer, to be fair. Weather from Portugal, definitely. Economy, NHS, which is the healthcare system in the UK. Food-wise, from Portugal, of course. Open-minded people, polite people from the UK. I would choose that. Also, night out subjects. I would choose Portugal because Portugal night outs, it starts later, but it finishes later as well. And for example, in Portugal, we used to go to a night out around 12, 1, 2 a.m. and we would come back home around 7, 8 already in the morning time. Whereas in the UK, everything closes way earlier. Maybe the max you can go, it's 3, 4 a.m. So they start really early, but they finish earlier as well.
What's something about Portugal that feels completely different when you return after living in the UK for so long?
I have quite a few things in my mind, but I have to talk about the sun. So this is something that happened. It's easier for me to speak with examples. So when I used to live in Portugal, my body, my skin used to handle the weather much better than now. So I used to go to the beach, swimming pool, weather used to be 30, 35 degrees, and I used to be okay with it. So a few years ago, like 2 or 3 years ago, I went to Portugal, Setúbal to be more precise, and the weather was like 25, 27 degrees. And for the first time in my life, I got a sunburn. And I was actually quite surprised because I used sun cream and everything. But I noticed that my skin no longer can withstand warm temperatures from Portugal, especially in summertime. Yeah, that's something that really changed for me.
Do you think you'll ever move back to Portugal? Why or why not?
It's a good question. And I sometimes think about this, and other people have asked me this question before. I think, yes, eventually I would like to, for example, retire in Portugal. Or even if, for example, I could find a job in the UK that allows me to work from Portugal. If they allow me to work from Portugal permanently and, for example, come back to the UK once or twice a year, that's something I would consider, and I think I would do it, because living in this country with this weather can be very depressing at times, and I don't see myself living in the UK for the rest of my life. So even if it's retirement, I would like to go back to Portugal.
Looking back, would you still choose to move to the UK, or would you have picked another country?
It's a tough question. I would still move to the UK because in my position at the time, I already had family living in the UK, and moving to another country by yourself can be very, very difficult. Therefore, I would still move to the UK, considering that I already had family here, and that helped me a lot adjusting and adapting to a new country with a different language. So yes, I would still move to the UK.
Big thanks to you, Tiago, for opening up and sharing your honest experience after 15 years in the UK. These insights are gold for anyone thinking about leaving Portugal or even moving back. If you've got questions for Tiago, drop them in the comments. We might bring him back for a part 2. And if you're curious how life compares across the Atlantic, check out our interview with Philip, a Portuguese expat who's been living in the US for almost 20 years. Click now, and I'll see you there. Ciao!